Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We have a special guest on the show today, Alex Golden from Blue Wire Pods. Alex is a Pacers podcaster, a Pacers expert. So we figured with all the turmoil going on in Indianapolis right now, why not have a Pacers guy on? Alex, I believe you're the host of Setting the Pace on Blue Wire Pods, right? And I'm sure that it's very interesting times with Pacers fans right now, huh?
Oh, yeah. Setting the Pace is the podcast. We enjoy talking about the Pacers. And quite frankly, this season's been a bit of a downer for the team. And so with all of this stuff kind of coming out this week, it's definitely been a more trendy thing for us to talk about it. Obviously, fans are excited and interested in seeing what could come from all of these reports. But yeah, it's been an interesting week. There's been a lot of news in terms of the Pacers this week. So just trying to take it day by day.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that it's a team that's been sort of like all right, let's kind of keep the status quo, try to get better internally. We're not going to tank. And now it seems like they've completely switched directions and sort of thinking. And you hear these reports that Shams put out that, okay, well, now we've kind of tried that for a long time. Let's try something else. And you're hearing that basically everybody is available, including Sabonis, Miles Turner, and that they're really going to completely shift sort of philosophies. So, Alex, I guess my question for you is that, as somebody who's been a Pacers fan for a while, is that sort of shocking to you that they're deciding to do this now, or was it just a long time coming?
No, it's a long time coming. It's a breath of fresh air to really hear them come out and say that they're willing to make some moves. Now, a lot of people misread the going into a rebuild into a blow it up type of situation. If you actually read the context of the article, it says we'll trade, Karis LeVert's open for trade and one of the centers, not both. So it seems like while multiple players are available, except for Malcolm Brogdon, who cannot be dealt this year because of his extension, it seems like they're still trying to win despite trying to shake things up a little bit. So it's not like a full-on rebuild like you're seeing with OKC or maybe even Orlando, right? It's more of a, hey, this core has been together for a couple of years now. It's not really working out. Karis LeVert, it did not end up being the guy that they hoped he could be. He's kind of been someone that's not fit well into the Carlisle system. And so then you're just looking at the modern day NBA, right? You don't usually play two centers in your lineup, and the Pacers have been doing that for 3 years now, I believe, with them both starting. And Miles Turner essentially said he wants to play the five on both offense and defense. So it's if they don't want to trade Sabonis, then ultimately he would like a new opportunity to go somewhere else. So it's just been kind of a weird situation as everything's kind of came out. But ultimately, I do think that this team is ready to shake it up because the results from this current regime have not produced what they were hoping.
Could it also be a fact that maybe ownership and management put this out there to shake the team up, as if to say, if you guys want to continue to play together, let's get our act in gear? Then they have a nice win over the Knicks, and maybe that's a way to motivate the team.
Yeah, that's a big possibility, Sap. I've heard kind of some rumblings that maybe this Jared Weiss piece with Miles Turner was going to release before, or not before, but I think that there's a chance that the front office may have caught some wind of this Jared Weiss piece on Miles Turner's interview with the one-on-one before the Shams Charania Bob Kravitz report came out. So they're pretty much trying to diffuse any kind of Miles Turner wants out. Like, they don't want to highlight, a player wants out of Indiana. More so, hey, we're looking to move them. So I think that the Pacers kind of did this to cover their butt a little bit, to try to make it look like players want to be there, right? Because there's some obvious things with Oladipo and Paul George, both kind of expressing their frustration with the franchise. The franchise gets a bad knock on its name for not being willing to spend or willing to make the moves necessary to get this team back to a playoff contender, right? So I've heard some rumblings, not 1,000% sure if that's true, so don't put me on record saying it is true, that's what happened, but it does make some sense if that's the case. If you knew this piece about Turner was coming out where he's like, hey, I'm open to being traded. I'd like to be moved if I'm not going to be the focal point or the center on defense or on offense and defense here. The Pacers get out in front of that and say, well, we're open for business.
Yeah,
You look at
here's
the
the
Pacers this year, they're
sorry, go ahead,
right
Seth.
now at 11-16, and yet they've outscored their opponents by nearly 2 points per game, which would translate into a 15-12 record. So they're 4 games off of what they should be based on how they've played. Why is that?
No clutch player, no guy to go to down the stretch, no closer. Team identity has been kind of hard to find. I don't think they have one. So while Sabonis on paper might be their best player, 2-time All-Star, right? They don't have that guy to close games. That's who Paul George was. That's who Victor Oladipo definitely was. And now you're looking at, okay, can Chris Duarte hit a shot for us? Can Karis LeVert make something for us? Can Brogdon do something? And it's just like you're not going to either Turner or Sabonis, right, to be that go-to guy to get you a bucket towards the end of the game. So it's the guard play has been hit or miss all year long, especially in clutch play. And it's just been one of those weird things. You don't usually see a team with that positive net rating at 11-16. It's just not something you're very used to seeing. So the Pacers, if they could just figure out a way to get a closer on this team, that would probably flip their record. But right now they just don't have that closer. And I don't know if they will have one. There's a possibility with TJ Warren coming back by maybe the end of this season or next year. He's kind of that guy, but it's just that's something they desperately need.
Yeah, TJ Warren obviously had that fantastic run in the bubble, and he's certainly somebody that can score the basketball. But by the time he gets back, this team could look completely different. And so, they're putting out that, we're open to dealing any of these guys. Like you said, Alex, maybe not all of them. But who of LeVert, Turner, and Sabonis, in your mind, is the most likely to be traded? I would imagine Turner with those quotes, but is that maybe going to turn some teams off too?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't necessarily think it turns teams off as much. I'm not sure what his value is amongst the league. There's been a lot of reporting that they've been fielding calls for a while on Turner, but I feel like if it had been the value they wanted, they would have already dealt him because he's been involved in so many trade rumors. They tried to trade him for Gordon Hayward 2 years ago. I'm sure you guys remember that. So I still think Karis LeVert is probably the first guy they'd like to get rid of, even though they want to make a decision on these two centers. I just think Karis LeVert has not been a good fit here. He's had just not a good 3-point shooter, hasn't been the offensive playmaker that they hoped he could be. So a lot of times on offense, you can find him being more of a ball stopper. And there's been games this year where the team struggles to start the third quarter. They pull him out of the game and bringing somebody off the bench, and the team goes on I forget what game it was, but they went on a 19-6 run as soon as they pulled Karis out of the game. And it's just okay, that's kind of interesting because Karis on paper might be one of the top 3 players on that roster, right? But the fit wise, he doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And we know that Sabonis is not a 3-point shooter. So having another non 3-point shooter out there, it's a little bit easier to defend if you're the opposing team. So I would say pecking order wise, I think that LeVert is probably the most likely to be traded. And then I think there's going to be a lot more teams interested in Miles Turner just because his skill set is easier to translate with other teams, easier to, put him with X team and his skill set fits right into their offense and their defense where Sabonis is more of a guy that doesn't need to be the focal point, but he needs to be involved in certain ways and he needs the right roster around him to maximize his talent. So I would say LeVert, Turner, Sabonis.
Do you think that the Pacers value Sabonis the most, though, in terms of what they're looking for a return? So I guess it's sort of like a 2-part question. He is a 2-time All-Star. He doesn't necessarily fit into every system. Like you said, he's not that sort of stretch the floor big, but he is extremely productive and, plays with a lot of energy. What sort of return would they be hoping for from Sabonis, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty overused example, but you got to look at what Vucevic was dealt to Chicago for. They got a lottery player and 2 first-round picks, and Chicago ended up giving up another lottery pick last year for which ended up being Wagner to the Magic. So the Magic, made out pretty good on that deal for Vucevic, a guy that was 3 or 4 years older than Sabonis. So Domas he's not quite the shooter as Vucevic, because Vuce can knock down that 3-point shot at a decent rate. But I do think Sabonis is one of the best screeners in the NBA, one of the best, facilitators in that center position. He does a lot of good things, although it's not like he's, a great defensive player whatsoever. But he can stay in front of his man pretty well. He's gotten better at that over the years. I've enjoyed watching his matchups with Julius Randle, just, giving that team somebody, another physical guy to bang with Julius Randle and get physical with him, not a rim protector whatsoever. But I think the Pacers, in terms of value for him, you got to think 25-year-old center that's a 2-time All-Star. You cannot sell him short for anything. And he's still got 2.5 years left on his contract, where Miles Turner only has 1.5. So his value is going to be much, much more higher than the two guys that I mentioned earlier, LeVert and Turner. But like I said, I just don't know exactly what teams would be willing to trade for him and how much they'd be willing to give up, and if that would meet the criteria of what the Pacers believe is fair value or equal value in a trade.
From the outside looking in, I would assume that Sabonis is the most popular Pacer. If that's the case, is it difficult to deal him that the fan base would kind of revolt if he gets traded?
I think you'd have a lot of upset fans, but at the same time, there is a lot of Miles Turner fans here as well, because he's the longest tenured Pacer. And a lot of fans feel like Turner has been held back by Sabonis, where the Sabonis fans feel that Turner had his opportunity the first 3 seasons before Sabonis became that starter and kind of showed, hey, that he was the better player. So it feels to me, and from what I see on social media and replies I get, feels like there's a pretty good 50-50 divide between Turner and Sabonis fans. So whatever move they make involving one of these centers, you're going to get upset fans. I don't think it's going to necessarily result in a revolt, but I have seen people say that if the Pacers trade Turner, they might not watch the rest of the year. So, fans are fair weather at the moment, but I think if the team starts winning, that is ultimately all that matters. And I think that Sabonis is the better player overall. He's the guy that I would probably keep if you ask me to make a decision between these two. But at the end of the day, I think that Turner does bring something unique to the table with his rim protection and 3-point shooting ability. I just don't know what type of role he really wants, what type of bigger role that he really wants, because I feel like what the role that he's in, it's maximizing, in a sense, what he can do. If you give him all these bigger roles, he's not a great screener and he doesn't have great hands. So it's one of those things that what he's not great at, Sabonis is great at, and then vice versa. So I don't think fans are going to revolt. Fans have been begging for change for probably 2 seasons. So I would anticipate the fans just maybe being reactionary at first, but settling into being okay with it.
How much is the disappointing start fallen on head coach Rick Carlisle, who they brought back this year? How much has fallen on Carlisle?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask people who are covering the team, they're kind of perplexed on how Carlisle is using Sabonis. There's been a lot of times when Sabonis is used correctly and has a higher usage, and the team wins most of those games. Their offense looks completely different. But then there's times where he's got Sabonis and McConnell almost playing out on the perimeter, like you're trying to use them as stretch players. And if you know McConnell or Sabonis, they're not 3-point shooters whatsoever. And so, I think fans would say we've had 3 coaches in 3 years. This is a roster problem, not a coaching problem. And I agree with that. But the coaching also has been a little bit interesting in how Carlisle has gone about, number 1, his rotations, and number 2, how he runs his offense and who he runs it through. So I think it's a little bit of Carlisle's fault for some of the mishaps with this team, but this team has gotten better. And I just feel like the losing, it's some of the losses they've had, like the loss they had to Detroit was just a massive loss. Like Rick Carlisle comes out after that and says, we have a hard play issue. You're talking about a team that's trying to get back to the playoffs, and you're like at 18 games into the season and you're already having an issue of playing hard, your starters. And then the very next game, they get benched in the 3rd quarter because they're down 28 points to the Charlotte Hornets. So I'm not exactly sure what caused all that by the players, but I'm sure they're very they've been going through some ups and downs with just how the ebb and flow of the offense has gone. But I think overall it's gotten better. They're playing a little bit more looser, and they've won 2 in a row. And it's Friday afternoon when we're recording this, so we'll see if they can continue that streak to 3 and maybe flip the season a little bit.
Alex, we talk a lot about the Celtics on the show because we are based in Boston, even though Sap is a Lakers fan because he's a LeBron guy, but I'm a lifelong Celtic guy. And my frustrations with the team right now are basically that they're stuck in that NBA no man's land, that, bottom middle area where, okay, you're not bad enough to bottom out, but you're still not going to probably win a round, or maybe you'll get into the playoffs and win a game. To me, that's sort of the worst place to be in the NBA. I feel like the Pacers are stuck in a very similar place. So, is there any sort of sentiment amongst the fans to just like, okay, this is about as good as we're going to get. Let's just sort of start from scratch?
Yeah, I think fans would actually embrace that, but they wouldn't show up to games to support the team if they went into a complete rebuild, right? So that is why the front office has, and ownership really has made it clear, hey, we're not bottoming out. We're going to make some minor moves, right, to try to change things up a little bit. Like, we saw a little bit with Boston. They got rid of Kemba Walker. They got Al Horford back. They've kind of gone a different route with things, but I mean, even Al Horford with what he's making, it's not ideal. He's not been great this year. He's been okay. And you've got young players on Boston too, right? But it just feels like you've had that same core of Jalen, Jason, and Marcus together for a while, and they just extended Marcus as well. So I think Boston fans and Pacer fans are kind of in a similar boat where we don't have that A-level player like y'all have in Jason Tatum. And I think Jaylen Brown is probably like a B plus, like could almost be an A-level player at some point. Given the right situation, the Pacers don't have that. And you guys have a better, you're more equipped to today's NBA having two great wing players with the Pacers wing players. It's TJ Warren who's hurt, and then Karis LeVert, who's been suffering a ton of injuries his entire career. So now you're relying on a 24-year-old rookie and Chris Duarte to come in and try to patch that hole. And then at other times, Justin Holiday. So I get what you're saying here. It feels like they're in like this purgatory of mediocre basketball. But if they were to trade everything and just start from the ground up, it might be nice to push the reset button. But at the same time, I don't believe, in my personal opinion, this fan base would truly embrace a complete and total rebuild.
Yeah, it's not really been in the Pacers sort of culture. I mean, they've been perpetually either good or, mediocre. I feel like very few seasons have they been absolutely, terrible. But it's sort of hard, right? Because you want to pick a direction. Mediocre is no direction, right? That's sort of like okay, we're just going to tread water, hope we get better internally. And that's, my frustration as a Celtics fan. Alex, do you have a preference for what they do?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, like they've tried with all these different coaches, right? Nate McMillan was Larry Bird's hire. Larry Bird steps down, and then Kevin Pritchard finally gets his opportunity to hire his coach, and he swings for the fences and hires Nate Bjorkgren, and we saw how that turned out. So now they kind of revert, go back to a guy they're familiar with, and Rick Carlisle, hoping that this is a guy with his NBA experience, winning an NBA championship, he could kind of make this roster fit together. And I think with this roster, I mean, even if you look like their top 12 players, you could sit to yourself and say they got pretty good players on this team, right? Good role players, guys that do certain things well. They don't have any like, oh, he is just an awful player on their team. I guess like the only player fans might think that about is Brad Wanamaker, right? Former Celtic. But if you just look at this Pacers,
oh yes, I remember.
Yes, so he's had to play some backup point guard now with McConnell being out, and he's shown moments of not good basketball, but he's not been like terrible like he was at the beginning of the season. But with that being said, I mean, overall, their top 10 guys pretty much are playable guys in a rotation, and you're still struggling to find minutes for everybody. But at the same time, it's just, it's like a puzzle piece that's just missing a few pieces from being a complete project. And I think that's kind of where they're at. They just need to make a few minor moves to tinker with the roster a little bit. And that's kind of the direction I'd like to see them go. I'm not 1,000% sold on Malcolm Brogdon being the answer at point guard. Little bit slow for me, more dynamic as an off-ball guard, in my opinion. He can put the ball on the floor. I think it's good. I mean, he's good. He's a good player. There's no doubt about it. I love having him on our team, but not as the primary, point guard leader of this team. Like, you've got to find someone better in that role than Malcolm Brogdon, in my personal opinion. So He's probably going to be here for the majority of his contract. I'd be surprised if they traded him unless something crazy happened. But, you build around him, you build around Duarte. They really like Isaiah Jackson. And then TJ Warren's the guy that said he wants to be in Indianapolis. He's a unrestricted free agent. We'll see what they do with that. I could see them resigning him to a friendly deal because of his injury history. And then whatever center they decide to go with, you got to figure out the best way to build this lineup. But ultimately, Jet, I will just say, I want them to be competitive and I want them to be more modernized, because we saw glimpses of it when TJ Warren was kind of playing the 4 when Sabonis did miss the entire bubble with that plantar fasciitis. So I would love to see them kind of get back to where you can maybe play TJ more at the 4 and then maybe get Isaiah Jackson sometime there as well, just to kind of be a little bit more of a modern NBA style team instead of a team that continuously runs at 2 bigs where they just don't fit whatsoever.
I have a solution. Have the 2 teams merge, right? The Pacers need wing players. The Celtics have 2 great young wing players in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Put Sabonis and Miles Turner as the big guys and Brogdon as a point or a combo guard, and away you go. You'd have a hell of a team if you combine the 2 teams. And I think there's some Celtic fans in Indiana still because of Larry Bird.
Yeah. No, I think they'd be fine with that, Sap. I just depends on who gets what, right? So right. I think it'd only be fair if Boston sent us Brown and Tatum, and we send back the other stuff to Boston, let them kind of go into that full rebuild like Jet seems to be wanting over there.
That's true. That's true. And I did mention Larry Bird. I know he stepped down a couple of years ago. Does he play any role with the Pacers right now?
Not so much. He was a consultant for a while. I don't know if he still is or not, but he did talk to Carlisle before he was hired here as the coach, right? Obviously, they have a history. Larry hired him at one point, fired him at one point, and he coached on a staff with him here when the Pacers went to the NBA Finals. So they've got a relationship, and they played in Boston together. I don't want to forget that relationship either. But, I think Larry did call him. Donnie Walsh called and talked to Kevin a little bit about it. And I think it was kind of like a collective group chat where they're like, yeah, let's go get Rick. He's our guy. But that's pretty much all Larry Bird's done. I really haven't seen Larry around Indiana either. I don't know where he lives at, to be honest. He did live in Carmel for a little bit, Carmel, Indiana. I'd see his daughter every once in a while at the gas station when I worked there buying his cigarettes for him. But it was funny to be honest with you. But with that being said, I don't know what Bird's actual role is with this team more than just a consultant every once in a while.
Yeah, the reason I want the complete sort of rebuild, I am impatient, but 2, like the standard for the Celtics is to be competitive for a championship. They won 17 of them, and now the Lakers won in the bubble, and so they're tied. And so I can see the writing on the wall with this team and be like, okay, this is about as good as they're going to get, unless they add a 3rd star or something. So there's that sort of frustration with the Pacers. I'm curious if because they've never won a title. So is the fan base more just content for the team to be, good and competitive and play hard? And did Milwaukee winning a title last year maybe give them a little bit of a kick in the ass because it was a team in their own division that won a title that hasn't won for 50 years? So, I'm just sort of trying to assess what the mood of the fan base is in terms of what their expectations are.
Yeah, I think the fan base would love to see a championship here. I don't think that they're happy with these Eastern Conference Finals appearances, and then we get knocked out in 5 or 6 games, even 7 games at some point. I know we had a nice little run there against the Miami Heat and LeBron James. I mean, tough team to beat, and the Pacers went toe-to-toe with them. I mean, that's the most excited I've seen fans in a long time, probably going back to the Reggie Miller days. But I think everybody kind of goes back to the brawl when that kind of run the Pacers' chances at probably winning a championship or at least competing for one, had they had Ron Artest for that entire season with Jermaine and Steven Jackson. But ultimately, I think Pacer fans have just kind of accepted the fact that Herb Simon is not a guy that will pay the luxury tax. He's not a guy that's ever going to go into full rebuild. He's a guy that's always going to try to make the most out of what he gets. Like even when they traded Paul George, Kevin Pritchard was like, we need to go into rebuild mode, suffer a couple years, get this thing back on top. And he said no. So that's why you saw him go out and get guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, Corey Joseph, Darren Collison, those type of players. And it's like, okay, let's do it. And that team was fun, right? They put fans in the seats for this season, but ultimately they still got bounced in the first round. So I think fans would just like to see this team get to the playoffs, be competitive. If they win a series, that'll get them more excited about the team and the future of the team. But I don't ever think that fans will be completely satisfied until they win that championship, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. But just the way things have been the last few seasons, it seems like this team is, right at that 9 to 10 spot. And you just don't really want to be stuck in that part of the Eastern Conference in the standings for multiple years, because we went through that quite a bit during the Dunleavy, Ike Diagu, Troy Murphy era back from like 2008 to like 2009, 2010, around those like 3 or 4 years in a row, constantly becoming the 9th seed with a 33 and whatever record and not getting a good draft pick. It's just the Pacers, the ownership here just will not allow this team to completely rebuild. It's frustrating to fans, but I think if you're a fan of the team, you almost have to accept it for what it is and just be okay with it.
Wow. Shout out Ike Diagu, pride of Arizona State. That's a deep cut. My last question for you, Alex, and I'm sure Sap's got another question for you too, and trying to speculate how the Lakers can get all 3 of these players for nothing. Do you have any? Obviously, everybody does this, right? When there's a trade rumor or anything like this, they have a fantasy trade sort of in their head. Can you speculate at all, or maybe what you would want if you were to trade, if the Pacers were to trade I know you're saying they're not going to trade all 3 of them, but just in, this weird world, what teams would you think would be interested, and sort of what would you, Alex Golden, want in return?
Okay, so if we're talking about Karis LeVert, I don't think there are a lot of teams that would have interest in Karis. Just trying to figure out where he fits exactly. Some of these teams right now, I think, would be more so inclined to maybe put him on the bench. There's a podcast that I'll be releasing later tonight. So if, people listen to this before that, then they're going to be spoiled a little bit. But with that being said, I had Sam Quinn from CBS on, and he threw out the idea of Karis LeVert going to Cleveland for Cedi Osman and like Colin Sexton. And I think if the Pacers can do that, that's a great home run kind of a deal, because while Sexton is going through the injury, he won't be here all year. You get him, hopefully re-signed on that rookie deal, and you're able to maximize his talent as that point guard that you want, who can play next to Brogdon, right? A guy that's more of a scorer type guy. So that is intriguing to me. I think with Miles Turner, there's a lot of teams out there. New York makes the most sense to me for Miles, just because they could really use a stretch big next to Julius Randle, who can protect the rim as well. They've got Mitchell Robinson, Nerlens Noel. Those are guys that can protect the rim, but they can't do anything else outside of the paint offensively.
Right.
So I think Turner makes a lot of sense there. Minnesota, they have their eyes on Miles Turner. They've had their eyes on him for a while. Same with Charlotte. Charlotte's a team that really likes Turner. He's been in a lot of rumors there. Other than that, Golden State to me makes a lot of sense, but I don't know how willing Golden State would be to trade assets like their young players to get Miles Turner for a couple more years at a run in a championship, to mortgage the future to some degree, with trading probably Wiseman or Kuminga with Moses Moody and Kevon Looney. It just does not seem like the most perfect trade situation for them. Toronto, that's another team that people have brought up as a team that could have interest in Turner as well, because he would fit really nice next to Siakam, Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, that athletic team. He said on a podcast this year that the best defensive system he's ever played in for himself was Nate Bjorkgren's, and Nate Bjorkgren is back on that staff with Toronto. So there's something to keep an eye on there. But I mean, really, you can make a ton more for him. And then with Sabonis, that's the hard one. I've thrown out the idea of Sacramento for Sabonis. Not sure what you'd get back in return, but you'd probably want at least a couple picks, and preferably Halliburton or De'Aaron Fox. I threw out a trade idea on one of our pods earlier this week of Karis LeVert and Sabonis with, I believe it was Torrey Craig and Jeremy Lamb for Harrison Barnes and De'Aaron Fox without any picks coming back. I just thought it would be an intriguing kind of trade to get a point guard here in Indiana like De'Aaron Fox, a young player too that just signed that huge rookie contract. That makes sense to me for the Pacers going after somebody like that. But and then another team is Washington. I think they've got a handful of bigs, but Sabonis completely kills Washington every time they play him. So I could see them being interested in pairing him with Beal and Spencer Dinwiddie and maybe giving up some pieces around that. But Other than that, I don't know. San Antonio's another team that people say would be good for Sabonis, but I think whoever trades for Sabonis, they're going to have to really talk themselves into giving up some good assets for the Pacers to even consider it.
Well, something to look forward to is Monday night. Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors come to Indianapolis, right? And he's closing in on breaking and setting the 3-point mark. And there's a good chance that he does that Monday night. So, I mean, it's the one thing that's good about the NBA. If your team is somewhat middling and it's frustrating, there's always someone coming to town that you want to see. And maybe you can do two really good things that night. He sets the record, but you still beat Golden State. You know, be a win-win situation.
Yeah, that would be nice. I'll be at that game actually. So I'll be interested to see how Steph Curry and the Warriors look. It's always a treat to watch him and Clay play. I know Clay won't be there, but anytime I've got a chance to see the Warriors has been awesome. I will say this, when the Pacers got absolutely destroyed by the Heat, I think it was last Friday, I was at the game. It was awful. I've never seen more Tyler Hero jerseys inside of Indianapolis than that game. I mean, fans were going bonkers for Tyler Hero. So you're right, Sap. It's really the other teams that are going to be drawing fans in here. Like, saw a lot of Knicks jerseys, saw a lot of Obi Toppin signs in Indianapolis. It's just like, what is happening here? But ultimately, I just, there's not really a guy on this team that the fan base is just like so in love with. I would say Chris Duarte might be the fan favorite at this point if you're really asking everybody.
He's just got a cool name, right? I mean, it's just
he's an Oregon guy, Sap. That's what it comes down to.
That's true. Is he going to Miami or Florida with Mario Cristobal?
Don't bring that up, please, Sap.
You didn't lose much, Jet. I tried to express to you that you didn't lose much in him going to Miami or Florida. I don't think he's a really good coach.
Only lost like 10 5-star recruits, but
right. Well, good. He can't coach them. So that what good is that? It's like having all the ingredients but not knowing how to put it together into something good. You know what I think I want to just touch on with Alex is the Colts and the Patriots are going to meet in about a week, coming off a bye week. Is there excitement in Indianapolis for the Colts this year? Because I think they're a sneaky contender that could cause a lot of problems in the postseason.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think also being on Hard Knocks in season, the first ever in season Hard Knocks for the Colts to do that, it has got the excitement level up out here quite a bit. Now, obviously this week it's been all Pacers talk with all of the stuff going on and the Colts being on a bye, but man, this is a Colts town. This is not a Pacers town whatsoever. So I think there's a ton of optimism here. I think fans really believe we can beat this Patriots team because we've been pretty good coming off the bye. And this team really, if you look at them, they've should have won more games than they have. I mean, they are what the record says they are to a degree because the best win they've had all year was that win in Buffalo where they just dominated Buffalo from start to finish. But, you look at a team like Tampa Bay. I mean, the Colts had 5 turnovers and only lost by 1 touchdown.
Should have beat Tampa Bay that day. They were in total control of that game. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was just kind of head scratching on how everything happened, the way it played out. But it's I like this Colts team a lot. I think they've got a great offensive line. Jonathan Taylor is an MVP candidate, in my opinion. People want to hate on Carson Wentz every single chance they get, but Carson Wentz has actually been pretty dang good under Frank Reich with the Colts. And if you look at the first couple of games of the season, he was going through the injury that he had, trying to get himself back. I mean, he pretty much almost beat the Titans in like week 3, where he was pretty much stationary. Both of his ankles were hurt. So for him to get out there and play and them almost to win, I mean, they should have beat the Titans twice, right? They lost both those games when they were up early on them too. So, I think the Colts are probably one of the most feared teams come playoff time just because of how dynamic they are. I think they're still missing another dynamic wide receiver. Michael Pittman Jr. is really good, but other than that, they don't have another guy to really go out there and you can just trust to get you a ball, especially with T.Y. getting a little bit older, going through injuries and stuff like that, and losing Paris Campbell once again to injury. He cannot stay healthy. But defensively, I mean, if they had some better cornerbacks, I think, Xavier Rhodes wasn't out there costing them opportunities on multiple times throughout the year. Fans would feel better. But I just think overall they've got a really, really balanced, solid team. And their record is not an indication of who I think they can really be come playoff time.
All right, Alex, my final question for you. Colts, Pacers, Hoosiers, who's the next team to win a championship in the state of Indiana?
I'll probably say the Colts. It's good to see Mike Woodson back with IU. Purdue might have a chance at winning a championship this year. They were.
I
Just
forgot about Purdue. Oh, yeah, of course.
And
Purdue was
Notre Dame. What about Notre Dame?
Well, we'll see.
That's probably not going to happen either.
Yeah, especially with them losing their coach, right? But
he's not that good either. He's got that phony accent from the South.
Well, my sister went to IU, so I wanted to ask about the Hoosiers, Sap.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't blame you. Yeah, no, who doesn't root for the Hoosiers? I mean, Isaiah Thomas is the greatest Hoosier ever, even though Larry Bird did spend a short period of time there before he transferred to Indiana State. It was too big of a city for him. And I remember when he was coming to Boston, I'm like, if that's too big of a city for him, he's not going to really like it here. But he did pretty well here, I think, in 12 or 13 years that I recall. He was pretty good.
Yeah, I think he was. He was all right.
I got the job done.
Good enough to win a couple championships, right? But yeah. So no, I mean, IU today is a 10-year anniversary of the watch shot when they beat Kentucky, and Dick Vitale had that infamous call, and Tom Crean's got his mouth wide open, just shocked that they just did that. Assembly Hall storms the court. I mean, it was iconic. And then you just think about last night, the night before, on December 9th, where Rutgers Ron Harper Jr. hits that half court shot to take down Purdue after becoming the number 1 seed. It's like, man, I'm an IU guy. I'm not a big Purdue fan, obviously, because of the rivalry, but at the same time, I'm just like, man, I feel so bad for Purdue fans right now. Like, this just absolutely sucks. Like, the one time they're number 1, the first time ever they lose to freaking Rutgers on the road. So it's like, and Rutgers is one of the most annoying teams in the Big Ten anyway. They don't even belong in the Big Ten. Makes zero sense why they're there. A lot of like Nebraska too. I don't get it, Maryland, but regardless, the Big Ten has become like the Big 14, and it's just kind of silly. But yeah, I mean, IU, Mike Woodson, I'll just say this real quick. Mike Woodson, glad to have somebody back that actually cares about the program. Archie Miller was an absolute joke of a coach. Did not like that hire whatsoever. Thought it was almost just pretty much like passing the mantle from a Tom Crean level of coach to Archie Miller. Might even have taken a step down because Tom Crean got more out of his team than Archie Miller ever did. So Archie Miller, just a guy that I never was somebody that really made a whole lot of sense in. That is why they bought out his contract. Whoever it was made a nice donation to pay that $10 million. And they helped push the train for Mike Woodson, a guy that's been away from college basketball for like 30 years now, whatever it's been, to get him back in there. So pretty cool to see Woodson in there as a head coach of college basketball after coaching in the NBA for such a long time.
Yeah, that's the Larry Brown route, right?
Mm-hmm.
You leave the college ranks for 30, 40 years, then you come back. And so, hey, I hope it works out. Like I said, my sister's an alumni at IU, so I root for them, unless they play Oregon, which is my alma mater. But thank you so much for coming on, Alex. I mean, it's not often we get to talk sort of in depth about the Pacers or Indiana sports. So we're glad we had somebody very, very knowledgeable on. Where can people find you if they want to listen to your show and want to hear your opinions on social media?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys reaching out to me, and glad that it worked out that we could do this. If you want to see all my tweets and hear all my thoughts on the Pacers, you can check me out at Alex Golden NBA. And then our podcast is at Setting the Pace 3 on Twitter. You can pretty much just find that on any platform that you want. Setting the Pace, a Pacers podcast. So yeah, I mean, really, I do a little bit of writing, not too much, at indiesportslegends.com. I do things I like, things I didn't like, and with the holiday season and everything going on so busy, I haven't had as much time to write, but still keeping the podcast going. So you can check that out, and I usually always tweet those out from my personal feed at Alex Golden NBA.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, so much for joining us. Make sure you check out all of Alex's stuff. As you can tell, he knows exactly what he's talking about. And I'm sure if a trade goes down, we'll have Alex on again to sort of analyze it and let us know from a Pacers perspective how it went. We are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. You can find the show wherever podcasts are found. You can find our socials at JohnSap25, at Jeff Stryer, and the youtube.com/Jet Stryer. Thanks again to Alex Golden for joining us, Sap. I will talk to you later. Thanks, everybody, for listening. See ya.